Hello friends, this is Savius, and welcome to Stellar Journeys Episode 3, where we head on into the 60s. Starting in December of 1958, Newton 2 takes off aboard an Arrow 2 launch vehicle, headed towards the moon. Newton 2 is a highly advanced probe carrying large solar panels, a biological experiment bay, a magnetometer boom, as well as several other kinds of scientific instruments. The trip from Kerbin to the moon takes approximately 5 days. Once at the moon, the stage stabilizes the probe's orbit to be highly elliptical to provide both high lunar data and low lunar data. This maneuver expands the transfer stage, and the kick motor separates the probe from the craft. Once the motor cuts off, the probe is sent to the far side of the moon. Once the orbit is stabilized, the probe passes behind the moon. Communication blackout occurs for 2 hours until it emerges, and a massive flood of data reaches the DSN. March 20th of 1959 witnessed a horrifying event in which one of the rockets built by the KSO had a major malfunction with the main engine and crashed on the launch pad. The formal statement says that the cause of the crash was due to rushed construction times. In the middle of 1959, the KSO released their latest rocket prototype, the Javelin 1A. The Javelin 1A was a new design of rocket that uses a 1.5 meter cross-section. On May 1st of 1959, the initial launch seemed to be going well. There were no propellant line failures, there were no engine failures, and all avionics were reporting go. However, 5 minutes into the rocket's flight time, one of the SRB's thrust nozzles blew off due to improper thermal tolerances. Thankfully, the rocket was still receiving commands, so the administration sent an order to activate the range safety. The KSO went through several months of quality control before further launching any more rockets. The next launch for the KSO would not occur until a month after the turn of the decade. An Arrow 2B launch vehicle carries a relay communication satellite to the far edge of Kerbin's sphere of influence. After the months of quality control, the rocket goes off without a hitch. The relay probe is a small format probe carrying the latest innovations with communication dishes. On paper, the probe should be able to communicate with any other probe in the Kerbin system at the right altitude. Thankfully, the probe reached its required altitude right before the sustainer engine encountered an unexpected failure with the propellant systems. July 8th of 1960 saw the launch of a new generation crewed launch vehicle. This launch vehicle, unlike Columbus 1, could carry 2 Kerbinauts into low Kerbin orbit. The capsule also featured a controllable service module for sustained burns while in orbit for maneuvering. Due to the payload being an automated prototype, there was a slight malfunction with the orbital calculation instruments. This miscalculation caused the capsule to re-enter at the wrong angle. All return landing instrumentation was intact, so the probe was capable of returning to Kerbin. However, the black box data shows that the internal temperature of the cabin at the incorrect entry angle was simply too hot for Kerbal survival. Further research and development would be required for Columbus 2 to be mission ready. November 2nd of 1960 saw the launch of an Arrow 2C launch vehicle, bound for a much higher orbit than previous missions. The destination of this probe, which was dubbed Newton 3, is a small satellite that is in far orbit of Kerbin. Newton 3 is equipped with several radiological and biological experiments to judge the danger of the object. Transfer to the object, which was later named Minmus, would take approximately 1 week. However, as it seems to be a trend with this decade, another engine failure prevented the mission from proceeding. By February of 1962, a brand new Japanese launch vehicle had been constructed with improved SRBs that can actually handle the thermal restraints, as well as improved guidance to allow compensation if any engine failures were to occur. Interest in this mission exploded when the Eastern Kerbin Press stated that Kerbal knows more about the Mun than it does its own homeworld. The 4 solid rocket motors separate at 27,000 meters. The main lifter stage continues to fire for another 2 minutes up into 67,000 meters. Once the lifter stage engine cuts off, the upper sustainer stage drifts all the way up to Aporaps. In an effort to test future sustainable fuels, the upper stage uses liquid hydrogen rather than refined kerosene. Once the orbit's been stabilized, the payload separates from the sustainer stage. The payload is an orbital laboratory meant for long-term studies of Kerbin's atmosphere. The KSO has begged and begged the press to not call it a space station. Regardless, it's now a space station. To further extenuate the argument, the engineers only added one window for observation of cloud coverage. June 12th of 1962 saw the launch of another Aero 2C launch vehicle. Carried on board is Newton 4, which is a copy of Newton 3 in both design and mission specifications. This 2-week-long mission took the probe to the very edge of Kerbin's communication capabilities of the era. Other than communication shortcomings, there were no errors of any kind. Once the probe entered Minmus's small SOI, it fired its engines for an adjustment course, so that it could return back to Kerbin without using any more fuel. October 20th of 1962 saw the first official manned launch of Columbus 2. Now that all the previous miscalculation problems have been resolved, the capsule makes it into orbit relatively easily. The cabin was much more spacious than Columbus 1. The last stage of automated guidance is automated circularization. Once that happens, the control of the engines is solely in charge of the astronauts. The mission of Columbus 2 is to rendezvous and dock with the aptly named Skyhold 2 orbital laboratory. Instead of using the last remnants of the service module's fuel, the astronauts prefer to use the RCS thrusters to slowly approach the station. Due to the lack of radar guidance, the docking is performed manually using a cone receptacle and an indexing key. Docking is successful and the crew makes it safely aboard Skyhold Station. A few days into the Skyhold mission, Newton 4 safely returns back to Kerbin, spin stabilized to conserve power. Due to the communication shortcomings, the only sample that could be viably returned was the biological sample. After about 3 weeks in space, the crew of Skyhold 1 is ready to return home. I would be too. Columbus 2 separates from Skyhold and uses its last remaining fuel reserves to deorbit. Once the service module is separated, 4 retro motors fire to further destabilize the orbit and ensure the capsule enters at the right angle. The capsule enters the atmosphere and the crew experiences 3 minutes of communication blackout. Once communications are established, the drogue chute deploys and the capsule slowly drifts through the cloud line. Once at 1500 meters, the drogue chute takes the main parachute out of its protective housing and aerodynamic forces cause the parachute to inflate. The safe return of the Columbus 2 capsule after 3 weeks in space marks a job well done for the KSO. Jeb and Tomboy Kerman make it back to their families before the holiday seasons are ready to begin. And that concludes today's episode of Stellar Journeys. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I look forward to seeing you all here on episode 4. This has been Savius, signing off.